so much as it did later on, 20 years later. And so people were riding public transportation in a big, big way. Matter of fact, look at this chart. So in the 1950, when there was about half as many people in this country as there are today, there were, close to 17.5 billion trips. 35 to 40% of Americans rode public transportation on a regular basis. Then you take a look at 2023, the last year where we have NTD data for, and it's around 4% of Americans are riding public transportation, about 7.8 billion trips with twice as many people. So, matter of fact, I'm working on pre-production work on a potential documentary that we would film next year through Transit Unplugged TV on, what's wrong with transit in America, why less than 5% of Americans ride transit. But here's what we had happening in the 1950s, right? Public transportation was viewed as an essential infrastructure, like water and electricity was. Matter of fact, a lot of the transit systems were owned and operated by utility companies. Power companies who were vertically integrated would sell their own power to the streetcar company. And that's the way it worked. And there were lots of for-profit bus companies and transit companies operating. Transit was primarily used for commuting, work to access commerce, especially in cities, and it was profitable. There were very few rider-focused surveys during that time. Most of the data we have available, as I've done research, is operational or financial. But I do know that during that time, over the next 20 years, car ownership was rising. And transit was still heavily used, but the seeds of suburbanation and car culture were taking hold. Public transportation, interest in public transportation declined from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s. And in the 1970s, most of the privately operated transit systems went bankrupt, belly up, and their assets were purchased by the local government. The key takeaway from this that I want to talk about just for a moment is that public transit usage has dropped by over 80% during the 1950s. I'm going to let that sink in that's rural, suburban, urban, general, across the country. And I've worked in all types of systems. I started out my career Queen Anne's County at the Department of Aging, and started a local county bus system, a small rural county of 50,000 people where I still live today. And then I've worked in mid-sized systems, Central Maryland. I managed multiple operations there. And then, of course, big city operations, Baltimore City. And we have always been focused on ridership as our core key performance indicator. Ridership, ridership, ridership. I remember when I got to the MTA, one of the first big meetings I had with all our senior leadership, and I told them, listen, I don't care about ridership. I mean, I care about it, but that's not our focus. My focus is to build a great transit system with safety, efficiency, reliability, and world-class customer service. And if we build that, hopefully they'll come. But ridership is actually the one statistic that we don't control. So why would we, justify our existence to our funders by whether or not we have, one more rider this year than last year, or 1,000 more? There's your numbers. Steady decline. Only 4% of people are using transit regularly today in America. And again, even that number is misleading, because do you know this? New York City transit. I just was emailing somebody from there a few minutes ago because I'm going to hopefully interview one of their presidents of their Metro North Railroad next week while I'm in Connecticut filming. But New York City, 40% of all rides that happen on public transportation on any given day in America happen in one city. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. New York City. 40% of all rides in America happen in that one city every day. So for most of America, it's probably less than 4% of people riding. And yet, surveys show that 84% of voters, people that are surveyed, see value. And they say transit is valuable to their community. As an industry, as Mark Ash from TransPro has pointed out very well, we focus on making the 4% to get the 4.1 or 4.2%. And that is all of our focus, instead of speaking directly to the 84% of the public who support it. They're the ones that are paying for it, right? I think it's time to modernize our value proposition. So surveys have been done, like they used to say on Family Feud. Survey said, So the survey says, what do 84% of the people value? They talk about the positive impact transit has on their community, right? Cleaner air, less traffic, economic opportunity, mobility for everyone. They actually, we can rank what they see, and the number one thing that people love is that they know it's involved in economic development in their community. It gets people to jobs. I remember when I was CEO of the MTA in Baltimore, Ricky, who was the CEO of the airport, BWI, we had light rail going right to the airport from Baltimore City. And he pointed out to me shortly after I got there, I hadn't thought about this, Paul, a lot of our employees that work at the airport ride light rail from the city into the airport. And so it's critical for our airport, not just for passengers coming in with their suitcase, but for employees coming in uniform going to work. Most people know that it's a very valuable tool for them to get employees to work. The second thing they care about is that it is mobility for all, meaning they understand that public transportation provides mobility and access to seniors, to people with disabilities, access to medical care. As I mentioned, I started my career working for a Department of Aging as the county's first transportation coordinator. And the people in our community valued what we did because they knew, even when we started a public transit system for the general public, that at core, what we were really doing was we were helping provide mobility, right? So, someone living at home might end up in a nursing home if they don't have access to care through public mobility. And they understood the value proposition of the cost differential there. If they're on Medicaid or Medicare and the cost to provide nursing home care is here, the cost to provide transit is here. And it is a value benefit to the community just in a cost benefit ratio, not even talking about the moral and the ethical parts of making sure that the less fortunate in our communities are really taken care of. Surveys from APTA, the Transit Center, Pew Research, local MPOs consistently confirm this, that public support for transit goes far beyond ridership, right? Every year, APTA and groups put out this, oh, great, 84% of all of the, or we won't use that number, 7 out of 10 of the referendums that were on the ballot, were voted in favor to raise taxes or to increase funding for transit. Those people are not all riders. Most of them aren't. They just see the value and they're willing to pay for it. Now, what do riders want? And we're going to get to this coordination between modes and all that. I can talk to that, as they say, till the cows come home. But what I want to talk to you right now is setting up the right context for that and what our messaging needs to be. What do riders value? I love this chart that I put together. It's and by the way, I use ChatGPT to help me do that, right? We got to stay with the times. What do riders want? Well, they all say one thing, and that is frequency and reliability, right? My friend Kevin Quinn, who now heads up TransLink in Canada, likes to say frequency is freedom. And so even though we're in rural areas, and sometimes our bus routes may only run once an hour or even once or twice a day, what people want is frequency, but they also want reliability. They don't want to wait. I can tell you how angry it makes me. Just the other day, I went to the grocery store and there's one cash register working, and then the self-checkout lines were there, and I had too many things to go through a self-checkout line, and there was no bags in the self-checkout line. I found out later from my wife, you got to ask somebody for them. Okay, whatever. But I hate being 4 or 5 people back and having to wait. We all are used to instant everything these days, and the last thing somebody wants is to be sitting or standing, most likely, right, in our rural areas, standing at a bus stop, a pole stuck in the ground with a sign on it for 80% of our stops usually. I know, I used to run them. And standing there in the heat, in the mud, in the rain, and the bus is not on time. Let me tell you, the one thing we can do to make people not ride is to not show up on time or to leave early. They get there. Oh, good. I made it 2 minutes before the bus time. Well, the bus was there. Nobody was there and he took off. Come on, man. So we've got to focus on that. Number 2, convenience and coverage, routes that match real-time needs all over the country. Bus systems are reevaluating their routes in a post-COVID world to say, what do people want today? Not what they wanted 7 years ago. It's different. There's what they call the 3-day city now. You probably heard of it. Most of you on this call are from mid-size or smaller areas, mid-size cities, so it may not apply always to you, but in a lot of larger areas, folks aren't coming back to work even today, 5 days a week. So you need to see what your ridership is, right? And match your routes. Don't over-match service when it's not needed. Don't run 17 routes on Friday when you only got enough work for enough riders for 13 routes. It's a great way to value engineer your service based on what the actual need is today and what is projected to be in the very near future. That's what I would encourage you to look at least, if not do. Comfort and cleanliness are very important, right? You got to make sure. I remember before COVID, right? A lot of us only really washed our buses thoroughly once a week on the inside in rural areas. And obviously, we had to change that up. And I think most folks are still keeping that high standard of cleanliness, but we need to do it. And then real-time info, easy payment, right? Tap and go, security and safety. That's the priority of the new administration, as you know. For transit, they've said it over and over and over again. They want to make sure that people feel safe on transit. And unfortunately, a couple bad news stories from New York City or somewhere else get in the news, and people, even in mid-sized cities, feel like, I'm not sure it's safe. So you need to make sure that your system is safe and you've got all the tools in place, from cameras to emergency buttons for your drivers, et cetera, to make sure of that. That's what the riders are wanting. Here we talked about the value of the community, the people that don't ride. Here's the ones for the 4% that do ride. Now, all that is context, what we're going to talk about for the next little bit here. And that is, here in rural public transportation, suburban probably too. I looked at some of your names. I know where you work. I see Scott Marr on here from Tulsa. So it's not all rural people here. What do we need to be doing in our public transportation? Hint, coordination. All right. So that's me when I was literally half the man I am today. Probably 30 years ago or more. When I was working Department of Aging. And there you can see what I'm doing, right? With my driver, Ed, I'm showing people at the Crumpton Senior Center our new wheelchair lift on our bus. ADA had just passed, and we were buying some buses that had wheelchair lifts, and I explained to them how they worked. And what I learned then in the 7 years I worked there and as president of the State Transit Association, TAM, the Maryland Transit Association, and over the next 30 years of my career, I've worked in the business for 38 years now. This August, it'll be 38 years. I've learned that rural areas especially need coordination, right? I mean, we do it in a lot of areas, right? There's regional detention centers. I was a county administrator as well, and I remember, we worked on that. We worked on doing a regional 911 center where, we could support each other, all these rural counties around here on the Eastern Shore where I live. And even public transportation services or specialized services from multiple counties or multiple jurisdictions need to coordinate. We've created here on the shore where I live something called MUS, the Maryland Upper Shore Transit, where all the counties, there's 4 or 5 counties that have all coordinated their services together. So there are checkpoints where they can transfer from one to the other because, as you know, people don't only shop or go to work in their own county or their own city. They sometimes need to go outside that jurisdiction, and we need to service those areas. When I worked at WMATA, Washington Metro, I was the director of operations for the paratransit system there, the 4th largest ADA paratransit system in America. We had about 8,000 trips a day, up to 10. But we serviced 3 jurisdictions. We serviced Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Maryland. And so we were coordinating all the time those trips and trying to figure out which trips do we need to take as the ADA provider, which ones should Prince George's County or Montgomery County or Fairfax County put on their local transit system. This coordination, even in larger areas, is critical. A story to help illustrate. So I was as I mentioned, I was putting, buses on the street every day. We had 3 senior centers. We had I also ran the medical assistance program for the county, which was run totally separately. But the senior centers and the senior transportation, and then eventually, after a few years, we started County Ride, which in 1991 won CTAA's Transit System of the Year. When we were doing all that, I realized that for the 3 senior centers, which were a lot of our transportation, drivers like Ed would take these folks on his bus. Some of them drove, but a lot of them he picked up on his bus. And he would take them to the senior center 4 days a week, sometimes 5 days a week. Well, in those same buildings, we had adult daycares, which are run by the health department. As you probably know, adult daycare is a higher level of service than a senior center would provide for seniors. And they had their own vans. And so here's what was happening in reality. Ed was driving his van down the road into Crumpton, into Sudlersville, into Pondtown and other areas, picking up Mrs. Smith, Mr. Johnson, whoever, right? And there was a van, literally, in some cases, right behind him or in front of him, going to the other side of the road, picking up, Mrs. Ethel and Mr. Johnson and different people coming back to the same building walking in the same front door, but adult daycare went right, senior center went left. Somebody had figured out we should coordinate on our facilities, but no one had figured out we should coordinate in our transportation. So I talked to the health officer, Dr. David Dawson, who's a great man and a good friend of mine. And I said, Dr. D, we got to figure out a way we could both save money. I could pick up all your people, or you could pick up all my people, or we could do it on alternate days or alternate weeks or alternate months, something. But what are we doing? What we're doing now? It's ridiculous. And he agreed. So we spent 9 months trying to figure it all out. And you know what finally happened? We couldn't do it. The health department was a state agency, and they had separate insurance regulations than the county did, and never the twain should meet. And no matter how much we talked to our risk managers, and the insurance things blocked us from being able to do it. So we could not take their passengers on our bus or vice versa. What a shame. I remember Florida. Around that time, I had a friend named Joanne. I don't remember her last name, but she was the state of Florida's first big statewide transportation coordinator. They had figured out we need to coordinate this. At the time, I was also president of the State Transit Association, so I was trying to, use state resources, everything as president of that, and we couldn't get it done. But it was very important to do. It was a waste of money, waste of resources, and confusing, to be honest with you, to the passengers. Then you've got other people now who are so. That's an example of it not working, coordination. But obviously, it's a good story to say why we need this. There's lots of other services, right, in your community. Think about all the ones there. I've only listed the ones that were in my community at the time that I could speak to, which was I started a deviated fixed route service. We had a call-a-ride service. People call in, and we'd go pick them up with a minivan or whatever. We would even take them to Baltimore, like the Wilmer Eye Clinic for long-distance trips in a minivan. We'd have one driver, Miss Lois, who would take people up all the way to Baltimore and sit there all day, and we'd take 2 or 3, and they all had long appointments, By the way, Miss Lois, we used to do monthly staff meetings for all the drivers, and it was, we'd fellowship and have a meal together. Everybody bring cover dish meal. I don't know, a lot of times insurance regulations won't let you do that anymore either, or whatever, but she would bring a dish called sweet potato fluff, and I loved it. And got the recipe. My wife would make it for me, so I included that recipe, by the way, in that cookbook, Comfort Food. It's recipes from transit leaders around the world, their favorite kind of family recipe and the stories behind it. So it's a little segue into that, but it is like, and I'm sure it's that way at your operation. We're like a family, aren't we? In the rural areas. I mean, it wasn't that way when I was running WMATA or MTA. We didn't feel like a family in the same way it did in smaller rural areas. I mean, we were partners, and I preached the family thing. But when you have, like, I had 5,000 employees and contractors operating, multiple garages and facilities around the state of Maryland, we didn't have that same close family feel when everyone got together on a regular time. And that is something that makes us special. It also points out that there are, relationships that form even between agency heads. They can work on this kind of coordination together. Medical assistants, of course, a lot of you I know do that as well, or you outsource that to a broker. But just a little bit to talk about in rural transit, what we really need to do to provide the most cost-efficient service is coordinate. And we'll have time for questions, by the way. If you have questions, we're going to have some time at the end of this. You can even drop them now as you think about it into the chat, and Kara's going to read them to me later. Okay. Here's we all know this. Let me just go through it with you for a minute. Modes working together. This is what the title of the workshop is. It's critical, not only for the various types of operations, but in a larger area, let's say in Scott's area of Tulsa, where you've got multiple modes happening, your own modes need to work together. I remember when I got to Baltimore, the governor had asked me, Governor Larry Hogan had appointed me to be the administrator of the MTA, which also was the general manager and CEO of the MTA Baltimore, which was the Baltimore transit system. It wasn't run by the city, it was run by the state. And so we had 6 modes. We had bus, light rail, subway, and commuter rail, and paratransit, and bus, light rail, and a subway system. And so 6 modes. And we got there and we realized that they weren't interconnected. They were laid out the way they were laid out 50 years ago. And so we went through the history and figured out, okay, so The light rail was built 25 years ago when Governor William Donald Schaefer wanted to make sure that we had service to the Orioles Park, Camden Yards, the baseball team. And it actually opened the day the stadium opened. So that was built 25 years ago. There's several lines north and south of the city. And the hub is really the stadium area. And later the Ravens started there, and so it would serve them as well. And but the commuter rail was laid out 35 years ago, 40 years ago, and now it's outsourced to Amtrak and Bombardier. And the subway system was built 30 years ago, and so and they never connected. So the only way you could obviously connect, maybe in a couple spots where you could walk between the two, but the only way was through buses. You had to use buses, transit, as the connector, and yet no one had ever thought of that or put that into place. And so the bus routes really weren't laid out to connect anything. So we were running really 6 different transit systems. They all had their own garages. Can you believe it? They all had their own operations control centers. Yes, not just ADA paratransit, but we had obviously a separate one for the subway, a separate one for commuter rail, from bus. It's crazy. I get it. That's how it was built. That's how it was done. They are separate entities, but they need to be working together. Intercity rail, shared mobility now wasn't a thing really when I was working in Baltimore 8 years ago or 9 years ago. It's really come on in the last decade. But the flexible first and last mile options, on-demand microtransit, people are even now working to coordinate their ADA paratransit and their microtransit, which really took off during the pandemic. Why not put them together? They're basically the same type of service, and you can run them together. A lot of people are looking at doing that. Seattle, other cities have looked at it. Kansas City, right? Robbie McKinnon did it, 5, 6 years ago or 7 years ago, one of the first in the country to create Ride KC Freedom. Agency transportation, dialysis, aging, health department, all those, as I talked about, need to work together. Dialysis centers sometimes have their own vans, and they're trying to offload their passengers onto the local transit system. And there needs to be meetings held, MOUs developed, and we need to work on working together. And of course, then the active transportation, the walking, the biking, the scooters. I mean, in a lot of cities, even small cities, now they have, all this e-bikes and e-scooters. I remember visiting Memphis a few years ago. Remember when they first came in, they kind of like just dumped all their scooters into our cities. I mean, literally, they were like all over the place, and there was no rules in a lot of places. I remember in Memphis, visiting there and calling Gary, my friend who was CEO, and saying, Gary, what the heck is going on here, man? You got scooters all over your city. It's a mess. I'm looking at one right now up in a tree, literally. And shortly thereafter, them and many other cities said, all right, we got to get a handle on this. We got to get some controls in place. And so most places have done that now with regulations that require them to be put back, et cetera. And there's, boundaries. I remember riding the scooter, and I like to take scooters when I'm in cities as my own kind of guided tour or unguided tour. It's just me, or maybe me and a friend. We'll go out all over the city and ride all over. And I remember being in Louisville doing that, in Seattle. And in Seattle, there were spots where they won't work. They just kind of shut off. And you're like, oh, crap. Got to take it back because they have, lines now where you can't go past it to keep them where they're supposed to be. But integrating all that is key. And so what's driving it? Obviously, you need that interagency cooperation, those relationships you have, especially in the small urban and rural areas. I remember in Baltimore City, we didn't always have that. So I had to create like a monthly meeting with the director of DOT for the city of Baltimore. We needed to cooperate. I mean, simple things like, I'm running light rail and buses on their streets, right? The city of Baltimore streets. And so, William Johnson, who now I think was down in Fort Worth, was the director then. We started these meetings, and, be opportunities for us to regularly collaborate and say, what can we do to help each other? I remember telling him a couple times, you got to tell your plow drivers in the winter to lift their blades when they go over our light rail tracks, because they're scraping them when they leave it on the ground, and that causes problems, et cetera, at the intersections. So it's that kind of cooperation that's required. The other way you can do it, obviously, if you want to have inter-city or inter-jurisdictional cooperation, right, is to have integrated fare systems where you can, ride with one card. Now that's kind of been overtaken by emerging technologies, right? A lot of people have, a shared use card, but now most places are going just to use credit cards, right? Where you can tap and go. I remember Shashi Verma, who was the chief technology officer in London. When I visited there, when I was head of Baltimore, I was speaking at a conference or something over there, and I visited him, and he showed me, he said, Paul, come downstairs. I want to show you. We just introduced these tap and go credit cards, And he went down to the tube, the underground subway, and he said, "Look at that!" And everybody was just going up, tapping their wallet like every other person, or taking a credit card out and tapping. He said, "It's amazing." He said, "We introduced this 6 months ago, and it's already 40% uptake. 40% of the riders had switched over to using that as their mode of paying their fare, and so it's now, of course, taken over the whole world, and it is the future of mobility: connected, convenient, and really customer centered." Again, feel free to drop your questions in. Now, let's talk about what we can do for those passengers to create that seamless rider experience. We've talked about the fact that riders are not riding at the level they were in the 50s, but it has settled down now, even post COVID in most places, to like a comfortable 70 to 90% of pre COVID ridership. Some places are over, some places are doing great, and they've, passed their pre COVID ridership. We don't even want to be talking about that anymore, is what, I'm hearing out there, but just to be real about it, right? But it has kind of settled into a nice area. So we know who's riding, the basics. I mean, it's nice to get more riders, right? To justify what we're doing, et cetera. We're asking for more money for less people. That's always so that's why we need to talk about other KPIs, but key performance indicators. But we talked about that as setting the stage for this conversation. Now we've gone through the importance of coordination and cooperation. Now let's talk about creating the seamless riders experience, right? The new rider expectation, seamless mobility. Riders no longer think in silos. They think about, how do I get there? Not which mode should I take, right? From planning to payment to arrival, they want a frictionless journey, just like booking a flight. I'll never forget a year ago, I just talked to this guy the other day, actually, in Sacramento, SAC-RT. Henry Lee is the CEO there. We went and filmed an episode of our Transit Unplugged TV show there, where it's kind of like an on-ramp for people into learning about public transportation in different cities and how they can use that to get to all the, cool locations around the city, tourist locations, et cetera. And we went to Folsom Prison. Remember Johnny Cash? I'm a big Johnny Cash fan. And we were actually at lunch with some government leaders one day, and Henry came over to me, the CEO, and said, the mayor of Folsom is here, and he says he can get us a guided tour of Folsom Prison. Do you want to go? And I'm like, come on, Folsom Prison Blues. Of course I do. Although it was, I'm not kidding you, 112 degrees outside that day. So I think I got heat exhaustion out of that. That night I was shivering. But anyway, we went on a tour. And when we got to Folsom, they arranged for me to interview one of the employees who work in the administrative offices of the prison. She came out, it's on the video near the end, and the Sacramento video. And she said, Paul, I've had a life-changing experience. It used to take me 3 connections to get here. And I had to navigate, figure it out. Okay, I'm going to ride light rail to this spot, then get a bus. And then there was a shuttle bus that would bring her in. And she said it would take me 2 hours to get to work in the morning and 2 hours to get home. And now it's half that or less, 45 minutes, I think she said, because it's a one-trip ride, because somebody analyzed how to create a seamless rider experience. And she said, my life is they've given me back over, 2.5 hours of my day back every day. Amazing, man. Love that. Interagency cooperation, right? There's areas like Bay Area's Clipper system where multiple agencies use one card. Or in Dallas, DART, Uber has partnered up with them for first and last mile solutions. The challenges, obviously, are governance, funding, and turf. The solutions are, what they are. Come on. Memorandums of understanding, regional boards that meet together regularly. We need that interagency cooperation. Integrated fare system, we talked about that. Fare capping is something you could do if you have a sophisticated system. Planning tools that actually work, that blend them all together, right? They used to call it mass mobility as a service. It's still called that. It was really hot before the pandemic, and now it's kind of not so much, but it's using, it's using one app to plan and pay for and take your trip, real-time information. And it is used, and, WIM started the WIM app in Finland, I think, 20 years ago, whatever. And a few places have done it well. It's basically putting all those agencies on one app together. And it can include non-traditional modes and should include that, right? One thing like that's simple, right? I've seen this done in a few places, but not every place. You can consider designing for flexibility. So, let's say there's a shopping mall that everybody goes to, or there's a festival coming up, right? And you've got Uber, you've got Lyft, you've got buses, you've got taxis, you've even got private companies like Userve, who are ADA paratransit, that are partnering with a lot of cities across the country, and Silver Ride's another one that does it. They're doing great because they're actually ADA, drug tested and trained and all that. So you got all people going to this music festival, let's say, and it's 10,000 people there. Where do you go to pick them up? Well, create a universal pickup zone for that. Meet ahead of time with your coordination group and say, okay, let's all agree we're going to have a zone here, a zone there, and tell everybody with a sign that says, come here, pick up all transit here, right? Uh, you can use predictive analytics. There's all kinds of things you can do, but emerging tech is also helping us coordinate better. But in the end, right, like Stephen Covey said in his book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, begin with the end in mind. Put the rider at the center of everything you're doing. Uh, Focus on that on-time performance and safety, and make sure that the future of mobility isn't about more apps or more vehicles. It's about less friction and more freedom for the rider. Now, for those of the 84% that don't ride, here's a message you can tell them. Reframe your role from just a transportation provider to a community value creator. You've heard of that term, value wedge. What is the value wedge that we bring to the community? Don't always be talking to just your passengers, what I'm telling you. Invest in mobility for all. Let the public know we are improving accessibility for seniors and people with disabilities, riders needing access to medical appointments. We're expanding paratransit and on-demand microtransit coverage. We're partnering with healthcare and social service agencies to reach vulnerable populations. Let the people that don't ride know what you're doing and let them see the value, right? Like the Lexus lanes outside of Washington, D.C., where you can pay a little bit and you can ride in a separate lane, even if you're not more than one person in a car. And people would sometimes complain and say, oh, that's Lexus lanes. That's just for the rich people. That's a waste of, money and resources. Yeah, well, what did the people around there do? They flipped the script and said, think about it. If we only take 10% of the rich people's cars and we put them on these Lexus lanes, that's 10% less cars that are on your lanes. So now you have less congestion in rush hour. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. It's how you message to the people. Your community value proposition. Promote the economic development that your transit provides. Show how transit investment attracts, right? Michael Oglesby, I was just out there. The favorite episode I filmed last year for Transit Unplugged TV was in Tucson, Arizona, where it's so warm and welcoming. The story there was amazing. They had a light rail system in that small city that over the last 10 years has attracted $4 billion of economic investment. Everyone rides it. It's amazing. That's the story. Employers, retail, housing, talent that follows and values walkable, transit-centered, and connected communities. Use storytelling, right? Shoot a video with a businessman who says, you know what? We're here on this transit line or this light rail line now. We've seen stronger sales coming in. People are riding in. I'm able to hire people I couldn't hire in the past that didn't have transportation here. And it's providing access for people with disabilities to get to my store. Tell the story to the 84%. And then you can even engage them as advocates. Make sure the messaging is, in my opinion, you may not ride, but you benefit. You can even offer supporter programs or transit ambassador roles or survey them and say, we know you don't ride. What would you like to ride? What would make it more attractive to you? How to succeed in transit. Agencies should not make it their only focus to try to grow from 4% to 4.1%, or take those 84% and focus all your messaging to them on ride, ride, ride. They don't want to ride. There's a reason why they don't ride or ride. The number one indicator of ridership in America for the last 40 years has been the price of gas. I'm not kidding you. Look it up. When the price of gas goes down, less people ride transit. When the price of gas goes up, more people ride. That's the number one. Do we have any control over that? None. So focus on what you can do and turn to the 84% and say, here's our policies and projects that reflect the reasons that you already value transit. And build transit systems on the flip side of the coin for what the passengers want, which is frequent, on time, safe, clean, and the right coverage. That's how to succeed in transit. You can hear all about this on a regular basis by listening to my podcast, Transit Unplugged, the number one mass transit podcast in America and the world. If you want to go to our website, you can pick up your phone right now. I'm going to leave it here for 30 seconds. Go to picture, click on that QR code. It will take you to the transitunplugged.com website, where you can see not only the podcast, which is weekly, where I interview a different CEO every week. A lot of times they're small, small cities, etc., We just did Serial City at the CTAA Expo. We interviewed a couple leaders there from smaller cities about their transit systems, and we get insights of what other people are doing. I ask them, what are you doing? Subscribe to this. I mean, it won't necessarily every week may not interest you, but you can at least see who we're talking to and say, oh yeah, I wanted to see what so and so had to say. And just so you'll know, the great thing I've been able to do, I work for this company called Modaxo, which is the world's largest transit software company, and we have a lot of sister, like I work for the parent company Modaxo. We have 20 software companies here in North America. You may have heard of TripSpark. That serves a lot of probably your agencies probably use them. Translog, Vontus, etc., Trapeze. So they've allowed me to create kind of a team of people, and we now have there's no one out promoting our industry. Transit, everybody's up there necking alligators every day trying to make operations work. Believe me, I know I did it for 30 years. But now I'm in a place where I can do this. So this is what we've done. I just wanted to show it to you just for briefly. We do the weekly podcast. I encourage you to check it out. It's good. It's free. None of this stuff costs anything. It's here to promote our industry and to share best practice, right? That's what's great about what we do. We don't compete against each other. We're all in different cities. We all can learn from each other. The TV show is more of an on-ramp. The podcasts are people that work in transit or around city government, etc. The TV show is for the general public. It's Anthony Bourdain meets public transportation, is the way I like to describe it. Food, fun, culture, right? I'm going to Connecticut next week. We're filming Connecticut Transit, but we're going to go to the Mark Twain house, and we're going to go to, the place where they invented hamburgers, and they're going to show us how they made them and how you et cetera. Those kind of fun little nifty things. And then we show you the transit system. Oh, this is how I can ride to get to, this amphitheater to go see Styx. They're in concert there. We're supposed to be able to maybe interview them. I don't know. We'll see. The rock band Styx. So the TV show is once a month. It's on YouTube. A show just dropped today. It's fresh. You can just type in YouTube, Transit Unplugged TV. The Miami show dropped today. It's fun. Then we have a newsletter. 2,500 people in America subscribe. You can do it too. Once a week. It's all you'll get. No spam. None of this is sponsored. It's just by my company. But you can get an email that tells you all the stuff going on that week in the Transit Unplugged universe. We do live CEO roundtables. I'm going to do one at the APTA conference coming up at the Vontus booth on the trade show floor. And then we have a weekly news minute that Julie Gates on our team puts out once a week. She's a former FM DJ, famous around the country, and now she does a one minute once a week, the hot news items from the previous week. You can just find it on LinkedIn. That's what we do. I encourage you to join our family and team. So thank you so much for your time and attention. And Kara's going to come on, and we'll see if there's any questions I can answer. I appreciate your attention today.
That was fantastic, Paul. You could tell by all the emojis of hearts and thumbs up. We really all learned a lot. Now, there are a few questions, and I'm going to read them, and I'm going to do my best to type the answers as you talk.
All right.
First one is, I'm interested in your thoughts, experiences with emerging commingling trend that is mixing paratransit with service with general population fixed route service within a designated area. You talked a little about mixing paratransit with microtransit, but let's talk about this question.
Yes, good. Thank you, Gretchen. Good question. Yeah, I mean, travel training is a big thing, right? And travel training is going out and providing some additional training to people with disabilities to allow them to ride the fixed route service. That was the goal initially, right? It wasn't just to set up a separate transit system for them, paratransit. And a lot of cities do amazing work on this. If you want to go somewhere, great, or you can watch it on our Las Vegas TV show from just a few months ago. City of Las Vegas, RTC, does an amazing job of training people to ride transit in their city, people with disabilities. So it is done. It should be done. Every bus in America now, fixed route, has to have a wheelchair lift on it. And so it has access. Although, you probably know this as well as I do, every city I've been in, the majority of people that ride ADA paratransit don't need a wheelchair. They're able to walk, but they still may have some, may need a walker or a cane or some type of mobility device. And so, yes, I think that it's definitely worth looking into. And I'm sure RTAP has training materials. They have training on everything else on how to set up a great, program to train people how to ride your public transit system. Do you have something like that, Kara?
We just published a best practices article, updated
Oh,
it on
oh,
travel training.
good.
So that's in our latest newsletter.
Perfect.
Okay, good answer. So the next one is you were talking about driving integration, and somebody wanted you to talk about how open interoperable data can drive integration of systems.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Open data is what they call it. It's not having proprietary data, but having open interoperable data so that various transit systems around can tie into each other well. Yeah, I'm all in favor of that. I got no problem with that.
Do you think it drives integration?
Of course, yeah, yeah, because it will allow neighboring jurisdictions or even operations in the same jurisdiction to have access to each other's data enough so that they can see each other's, let's say, GTFS data that we talked about earlier, so they can see where the vehicles are at a specific time. One of the big things that people want is what's called connection protection, right? Especially when it's um, two jurisdictions or two services connecting. I mean, the simple way to think about this is when you take a plane and you have to, go to a city, go to a hub. Like if I ride Delta from BWI, I got to go almost every time to Atlanta to transfer to another plane. Well, what if that plane leaves before I get there, right? We're running late. It leaves, it's a major inconvenience. Think about it if you're a person with a disability and you've missed your connection. I mean, it's a major deal, or a senior citizen or senior out there. So I would say that making sure you have each other's ridership data, where the bus is at any specific time, is key to making sure that you have that connection protection, so that this bus isn't leaving before that bus comes because they can't see, they don't know where that other jurisdiction's bus is.
Okay, great. And while I'm typing that up, I'll start the next question. Somebody wanted you to talk about psychological safety. How can you think I will make it to that meeting or appointment? That kind of confidence is lacking for some of those who want personal control of their transportation. You talked a lot about the rider, so this is about the rider. Even if they will face the same risk of delays on their own. So talk about the psychological safety of the riders a little.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. Guaranteed Ride Home, right, is the program that a lot of agencies put into place for people who are commuting into a city. Let's say it's 30 minutes away from their home base, the suburbs, and they're going in. And what if I miss my bus, or what if I have an emergency at home? My son, fell off his bike, and I've got to get home, and go to the hospital or whatever. So you're right, psychological safety. I never heard it called that, but that I understand what you're saying. I think so. How do we provide them that assurance? It is to provide some type of guaranteed ride home program, even if it's limited. A lot of agencies will limit it to one time a month or whatever. Or if you have that on-demand service, if it's happening in your jurisdiction, that's much easier, right? If you've got a microtransit or on-demand service, or um, you've got a contract with Uber or Lyft or Userve or Silverride or a taxi company, and you say, yes, okay, if you missed it, we have a program where for a subsidized rate of $2, we'll have a taxi come and pick you up and take you where you need to be. So a lot of people do that. I mean, I think Brad did that down in Pinellas County, one of the first ones in the country, over a decade ago with Uber, and most people have done something like that. So I would suggest, the easy way to do is contact your local taxi cab company if you have one and say, would you be willing to work a deal with us where we could call in trips to you? And, you should be willing to subsidize it some, maybe it's half price or something like that. And you could put a limit on it and say, you can't do this every day, but, twice a month or whatever, we'll do this for you. You can call in and it gives you that kind of peace of mind that you'll get a trip home. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so the next one is, and this is interesting, this is really multimodal here. Is there any talk between public transportation and public entities like UPS, United Parcel Service? How they move things efficiently could guide innovation in moving people.
Yeah. That's a great story. So you may know a company called Transdev, right? So Transdev CEO uh, is a former FedEx employee, and she was trained by Fred Smith. He was a mentor to her, and they she said to me, I've taken the lessons I learned from FedEx and put them into place to make sure that TransDev, her name is Laura Hendricks. I don't think she'd mind me giving her name out. She's a well-known person. The head of TransDev, she learned and that information about innovative and, how to run it. She's used those lessons in her career at TransDev. So, yes, I think it's a great, great idea. And there's more lessons we can learn. I've hired people that have brought in from trucking companies, and things like that. For instance, there's a guy named Bob who I hired to head up the bus operations in Baltimore. And Bob came to me one day, he interviewed for the director of bus operations. He had no bus experience, but he had a career in trucking and logistics. And I said, look, Bob, I remember it's like 8 years ago now. He's still there. He's head of bus. I said, you're going to have to convince me, man, because you got no bus transportation. So it was a 2-hour interview. He spent the next 2 years, next 2 hours, answer my questions, explain to me how you're doing. We've done. All right, I'm going to give you a shot. I think and he did great. He's still there. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot we can learn. Another industry that we learn from is aviation. For instance, the guy that's head of the transit system in London, Andy Lord, worked his career at British Airways. And he told me, I interviewed him on the podcast and on one of our TV shows on a CEO roundtable. And he said, yes, I asked him that specific question. What have you brought, And he said, oh, a ton, you talk about safety. Safety is critical in aviation, right? And innovation and all that. And also, I did a show last year, Transit Unplugged TV show in Australia. We did one in Melbourne, and that one included a visit to their their national bus conference. And it was in a place called Tasmania. Remember Bugs Bunny, the Tasmanian devil? That's where they're really from. And she came from the aviation industry, and she was the head of Tasmania's transit system. And so she talked about that on the show. So, yeah, there's a lot we can learn from our sisters and brothers in these other, look what just happened today. The Secretary of Transportation was promoted to also be over NASA. The president put him in charge of acting director of NASA. So there definitely is something going on there.
Wow, a lot of new stuff going on.
Yeah. All right. It's like another one popped up.
Another question might have just come in. And if an individual in a developing community, this is the last question we can take, with aged infrastructure, what do you recommend to approach local government officials to encourage the introduction of public transportation?
Okay, good. As I answer that, let me also throw out an opportunity for you all. If you're not linked in with me on LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn, Paul Comfort, and I put up information, latest trends, personnel news about the public transportation industry every day. I have 26,000 followers on LinkedIn, and it's all based around our industry. So find me on LinkedIn, link in with me or follow me, whatever you want to do. And I answer a lot of these type of questions on a regular basis right on there because people have questions. So as an individual in a developing community with an aging infrastructure, what do you recommend to approach local government officials to encourage? Okay, so if you don't have public transportation now, it's a big lift, right, to start a transit system. And so, I was a county commissioner. I was a county administrator. I understand how local government budgets work. It would be a long-term process for you to start a public transportation system in a community that doesn't have it. You may have to start in small pieces. So, for instance, you may start why don't we start a coordination program? Let's coordinate all the services that we already have in the community, do a little better with them. Why don't we see if we can do a taxi cab voucher program where we could offer people a subsidized taxi ride, 5 times a month. You might be able to get a grant to do that, or maybe the county government says to you, or the city government says, all right, we can put up, $5,000 or $10,000 to try a pilot program. And we've got somebody in the local community services department that could manage it. So maybe you start a taxi cab voucher program. Again, the average taxi ride might be $10. They'll tell you most of the taxi rides in a community are under 5 miles. So, we'll give a 50% off voucher for people who maybe are low income or people who are elderly or whatever, and start with whatever. You could start small and work up from there. It's beyond the scope of the time I have to speak to tell you how to start a transit system. That's another conversation, but those are some ideas I'd throw out. Kara, thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you all today. And you all, again, I hope to see you at an upcoming conference. I'll be speaking at the Kentucky Conference and Midwest Transit Conference. I'll be at APTA. So stop by and say hello if you see me.
Well, thank you so much, Paul, for answering those questions. And thank you to the audience for the questions. Great questions. And like Paul said, the conversation can continue. You can also contact us and we'll help to get you answers. So we're really glad you joined us today. Just a few more slides. This one is about upcoming events. And I love those emojis. Keep them coming. Next week is a special day on July 16th. We are going to have Rural Transit Day. We're going to have a prequel on X or Twitter from 1 to 2 with the Art of Transit. And then we're going to have a Facebook live chat where we're going to be sharing best practices, challenges, opportunities. Hope many of you will join us for that. Reach out to me at info@nationalrtap.org if you want to RSVP. Now, another exciting thing is we are going to have a new, well, actually, we've done it once before. It'll be our second Community Rise grant program opportunity. And it will open later in July, but we're going to be having webinars about it on July 22nd and July 31st. It's a great opportunity, and the grants are about coordination and partnerships and making transit better in your communities. So sign up for those webinars if you want to learn more. If you used or haven't used our Procurement Pro technology tool, we're having a webinar on the 24th on Procurement Pro tools and tactics with a whole panel, including a user of Procurement Pro. So you won't want to miss that. And if you are a state RTAP manager, please join our roundtable. That's on July 29th. And, we share a lot of best practices and everything is summed up so we can share it with the world too. On August 19th, we're going to be having our biannual Books in Transit discussion group meeting, Bus People. I just talked to the author this morning. It's an amazing book about his journeys on a Greyhound bus where he met real characters and wrote about it. And then we hope to see you all in Austin, Texas, December 7th to 10th for our Technical Assistance Conference, which is going to have something for everybody. It's going to be days of training, technical assistance, resource sharing. We'll have an expo, student poster contest, a walk of fame. You can nominate yourself or somebody else, and a lot of fun. So thank you. I think we are 1 minute away, so we all did great. And again, thank you so much to our presenter today, Paul Comfort. We really learned a lot and really appreciate your time and expertise. Here is the QR code for our survey. We want to hear what you thought of this webinar, and please either scan it with your phone now or when you get the email tomorrow, let us know. Thank you so much. And I just see there's one more question. Oh, I can answer this one. Will the presentation be available? Yes, I'm gonna get right on it as soon as I get off this. So you will hopefully, when you get the email tomorrow, have a email that you got posted on the internet, on our website, the slides, and the recording. So thank you all and have a great rest of day. Bye now.